What's the creepiest thing you've ever experienced in an airport? For some, it might have been getting trapped in a blizzard. Others might have been stuck in an airport overnight. But my story happened on a normal day when nothing seemed out of place. The year before last, I was traveling from Beijing to Los Angeles via Dallas for Christmas vacation. My flight from Beijing to Dallas was delayed 3 hours due to bad weather. When we landed, I had just enough time to make my connecting flight to LA if it wasn't also delayed. And my phone was dead because I forgot to charge it after my first flight. I sprinted through the terminal and made it to the gate just as they were boarding. My name was even called over the loudspeaker. But when I got to the front of the line, the agent told me my flight was full and they couldn't let me board. I explained about my tight connection and asked them to call the next flight to LA ahead and let them know I was coming. They did that and then said there was nothing else they could do. An hour later, another agent came and told me the next flight to LA would be in 24 hours. I was stunned and asked how they could let that happen after they knew about my tight connection. They didn't answer, but put me in a little room with a bed. I spent the night crying and screaming into my pillow. In the morning, I went back to the check-in desk and asked to speak to a supervisor. But when I explained what happened, he shrugged and said, that happens all the time. He then handed me a paper with a phone number written on it and said, "Here, call this guy and he'll get you on the next flight to LA." The agent walked away and I was furious. I took out my phone and called the number. A gruff voice answered and said, "Who?" I said, "I'm supposed to meet him in Dallas. I'm here now." The voice yelled, "Are you stupid? That's China. It's 14 hours ahead," then hung up on me. I immediately called security and explained what happened. They searched the terminal and found nothing, so I called the number again and got the same gruff voice. I calmly told him I was with security and they wanted to talk to him. He yelled, "Tell them I don't want to talk to them," then hung up. Security ended up letting me skip the immigration line and gave me a police escort to the gate. It was then I noticed something weird about the gate assignment board. One gate had lit up, Gate B17, but when I looked at the departures board, there was no flight listed for that gate. I followed the yellow line on the floor to the gate, and as I approached, the motion sensor lights flicked off behind me. Every step I took triggered another light to go out. By the time I reached the gate, it was completely dark and I felt like the only person in the airport. I stared at the gate and tried to call out for help, but my voice wouldn't come out. I turned around and started walking back down the yellow line. Each step I took made me feel less alone. And by the time I reached the end of the line, I felt normal again. I found a security guard and asked him where Gate B17 was. He looked confused and said, "You're looking for?" I told him B17. He said, "That's funny. Gate B17 hasn't worked in years." I was shocked and scared. But then I heard a woman calling for Gate B17 over the intercom. I ran over, and just as I reached the gate, I saw a man walk through it. He was tall and thin and wore an old pilot cap. I called out to him, but he kept walking. As I got closer, I realized he wasn't walking toward baggage claim or the exit. He was headed toward a solid wall. He stopped in front of the wall and disappeared. Then the lights behind me flickered back on and the gate went dark. The woman over the intercom said, "Gate B17 is now closed." I raced toward the exit, but my phone died halfway there. The air grew icy cold, like a pressurized cabin had suddenly depressurized. I pulled my jacket tighter, but it wasn't enough. By the time I reached the exit, my whole body felt like it had been stabbed with needles. As I walked out of the airport, shivering, I looked back. I could see a crowd of people standing in front of Gate B17, pointing at the closed gate and talking amongst themselves. I shook my head, thinking it was all a dream. "Okay, Then I heard the gate announcement crackle over the intercom. I froze. What was Elysium? Hadn't the gate been closed? Was that why everyone was staring at it? Okay, what was the flight to the lost city? I forced myself to look away and keep walking. After I picked up my bag, I decided to go back to the terminal to find someone who worked there. But as I entered, I saw a man in an airport uniform walking toward me. I asked him about the gate announcement, and he looked extremely uncomfortable. He told me it must have been a mistake and quickly walked away. I followed him, trying to ask more questions, but he kept putting his finger to his lips, shushing me. I finally caught him near the escalator and asked him what was wrong. He leaned in and whispered, "Don't ask about Elysium. You don't want to know what's going on? Please, just forget you ever heard anything." He then walked away quickly. Just then, I felt 2 sets of footsteps on the escalator behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I thought maybe I had misheard. But then I felt the footsteps again. This time they were louder and closer. I turned around again and saw a man in an old pilot cap climbing the escalator. It was the same man I had seen earlier. It was just a few steps away, but it was too far to make out his face. I could see that he was alone, and yet the escalator was making sounds like 2 people were climbing it. I was terrified, so I ran off in the opposite direction. I could hear the man's footsteps echoing mine. I ducked under a sign to hide and peeked out. I saw the man reach the top of the escalator. He paused for a moment as if listening. Then he walked away. A few minutes passed, and I heard the echo of footsteps coming down the escalator. I waited, but no one appeared. After a while, I went back to the information screen and asked it to show me Gate B17's flight information again. It showed the same thing. Flight 0, final call, destination, Lost City. It then showed Gate B17's location, and beneath that, the words, out of service. I was shaken, but relieved to see the gate labeled out of service. I finally left the airport at dawn. I asked one of the cleaning ladies about Gate B17. She looked at me strangely and said, "Gate B17 hasn't worked in years. Why do you keep asking about it?" I told her I had a layover and went to sleep. And when I woke up, the gate was working, and I saw a man get out of it and disappear into the wall. She smiled sadly and said, "Ah, you must have been dreaming." Then she walked away. But as I walked past the gate, I felt something strange. I pulled my phone out of my pocket to take a photo, but when I did, a piece of paper fell out. I picked it up and realized it was a boarding pass printed the night before. It was for Flight 347 to the lost city of Elysium. Hey, and the passenger's name was written right next to mine. It occurred to me that I had a choice. I could fly home to the United States and pretend that none of this ever happened, or I could stay in China and try to find the lost city of Elysium. Well, obviously, I chose to stay in China, which brings me to my chilling question. Are airports late at night connecting us to places not meant for the living? Not meant for the living.